Did you know that New Year's Eve has one of the highest rates of unexplained accidents and paranormal encounters? It's a night when the line between celebration and terror becomes dangerously thin. What you're about to hear will make you think twice before heading out to welcome the new year. New Year's Eve fireworks, laughter and celebrations. It's a night of joy, a time to leave the past behind and embrace a fresh start. But beneath the surface of champagne toasts and countdowns, some stories remind us that not every New Year's Eve ends in happiness. Tonight we dive into the eerie and the unexplained, true stories that will send chills down your spine. Most of us associate New Year's Eve with joy, resolutions, and celebration. Yet for some it's a night filled with dread, inexplicable events, and brushes with the unknown. Take Ghost Beach for instance, a desolate place forever scarred by the 2004 tsunami. What happened there one New Year's Eve left 5 friends questioning their grip on reality and fearing for their lives. This story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the darkest corners of the world wait for nights like these to come alive. This happened on New Year's Eve back in 2007. I was in my early 20s on December 31st, 2007. My college friends and I wanted to do something different than the usual parties. So the 5 of us went to a liquor store, bought a few beers, and started driving on the East Coast Road freeway. This road is a scenic beauty, with the beach on the left side and bamboo trees all along, giving it a spooky feel while driving at night. One of my friends suggested going to the Ghost Beach. I think everybody knows about the tsunami that hit the southern part of Asia in 2004, December 24th, killing more than 500,000 people. India lost around 100,000 lives. Ghost Beach got its name only after the tsunami had washed away an entire fisherman's village in the floods. It is believed that the beach is haunted. We all decided to go to the beach before midnight and party there for New Year's, which, in hindsight, wasn't a good idea. But we wanted something different, so we ended up going. As soon as we entered the place, the mood became a little somber. One friend started talking about his deceased girlfriend and began crying. Another started speaking about how his mom had passed away. We didn't know why we were talking about such things, but the place made us really gloomy. We went to check out the broken buildings and schools that still had broken toys left behind by kindergarten students. It was very, very depressing. We then drove to the shore and started drinking. We hadn't even had a sip of the beer when suddenly we heard a woman screaming, as if she was calling out to people around the neighborhood for help. We thought somebody was trying to molest a girl, so my friend started the car and turned on the headlights. We couldn't see anybody, but all of us wanted to help, so we started following the voice before realizing that the place was completely deserted. There was no one at this time of the night, let alone a woman. I alarmed my friends and told them to regroup immediately. One friend was missing. We tried calling his phone, but he wouldn't answer. We turned on the flashlights from our phones and searched for him everywhere, but it was in vain. When we got back near the car, we saw him sitting inside, crying. He had stopped the ignition and turned off the lights. Scared, we told him it was us, but he wouldn't believe us. I went and sat next to him to comfort him. We decided to leave the place immediately. Since it was a single road, we had to reverse the car all the way until we reached the highway. As soon as I started the ignition, I saw an old woman standing in front of the car, with her head down. Her hair was covering her face, and it looked as if she was staring at us. All of us screamed, and I started reversing the car as fast as possible. The woman started running toward us, gaining speed with every passing step. Luckily, we reached the highway and sped toward the city immediately. None of us uttered a word to each other in the car. Later, when we discussed it with the locals near the village, they said spotting the woman was a common occurrence. It is believed that on the day the tsunami struck the village, she had been calling out for help. The ambulance couldn't reach the village because the road was too narrow. Many of the villagers, including her, died there. This happened on New Year's Eve of 2021, when I was 17. on a now-deleted app called It's Me. It was an app where you could talk to people all around the world without the fear of showing your face, as you created your own animated avatar. Looking back, the app was a really enjoyable experience, as I met people I'm still friends with today. However, most people who used It's Me could agree that it could get toxic. Many users, including myself, trolled parties, which were basically live streams where a host could allow 3 other people to talk with them, while the party's guests commented in the chat. One time, I was trolling a party when I was new to the app, and the host was, unbeknownst to me, quite notorious on the app and already had a large following. Before this, I'd never heard of the host, although I knew a couple of her friends. Her name was Kaylani, and mine was Selenens, not my real name. Usually the people I trolled didn't have the reaction I wanted, that is, arguing back. But this host started arguing back and we went back and forth for a while. The party gained many guests and the comments were going wild. After the party, I texted her on the app, going back and forth with her again until we were full-on beefing, and I asked her to pull up. Honestly, I didn't want to fight this girl, because I was only arguing with her in the first place for shits and giggles, but she was taking me seriously. She told me she lived in Chicago, and I lived in Milwaukee, so I thought there was no point in driving an hour and a half just to fight a girl I'd never even met. And at the time, I was stupid and still had the mindset of a hood rat. So me pulling up to this girl wasn't far-fetched. It got to the point where this girl wouldn't shut up, so I did something I still regret to this day. I told her I'd meet her at her place if she was with it, and she accepted. I hopped in my car and put her address in the GPS. Not gonna lie, the apartment building she lived in looked sketchy and ghetto, but I didn't really care, because I was also from the hood. I brought my twin sister with me just in case Kehlani had people with her to jump me. As we pulled up, I saw a girl who looked to be Hispanic and had sneakers and a hoodie on, so I presumed it was her because of her accent and her clothes. I told my sister to wait in the car because she looked to be alone. I ran up to her and we started fighting. Not to brag or anything, but I'd been in many fights growing up in the hood, so I knew how to defend myself properly. To be honest, I was getting the best of her when, out of nowhere, some guy picked me up and tried to separate us. At first, I thought it was some kind of security from the apartment building, but he wasn't wearing any kind of uniform. Actually, he looked quite a mess, and he reeked of alcohol. He somehow managed to separate us, even though at this point I was going batshit crazy, and Kehlani was still trying to get little hits in. By this time, my sister came out of the car when she saw the guy getting involved, and presumably Kehlani's friends came from inside the building trying to hold her back. After we were separated, the guy literally started dragging me to a rusty, beat-up black Honda that was parked nearby. I started fearing for my life and screamed my sister's name. She came sprinting, but the guy had already opened the trunk and thrown me in, trying to shut it. I was kicking and screaming, but he was really strong and managed to shut the trunk. My heart practically stopped when I felt the car speed off. I can still remember my sister's screams for help. We drove for 5 minutes, and since I'm claustrophobic, I was frantically trying to get out of the tiny trunk. I was texting my sister, and luckily she informed me she had called the police and was following the car. After a few minutes, the car stopped. He lifted the trunk and dragged me by my hair into a house that looked run down and dirty from the outside. He practically threw me into the house, and I saw my sister running after the guy with a baseball bat we brought just in case anything bad happened. She managed to get one good hit on the man with the bat, but he kicked her off and locked the door. Even though I heard sirens nearby, I was still terrified of what he was going to do to me. He dragged me into a room in the back of the house, and the whole time I was fighting him off as best I could. The police burst in a couple of seconds later, however, and tackled the man. Surprisingly, he didn't resist and was quite calm, letting them handcuff him. I was reunited with my sister, and in that moment, I realized how precious life can truly be. Ever since that day, I've changed for the better. My sister and I no longer beef with anyone, and we've definitely grown up in the past year. After the incident, Kehlani left the app, I decided to call it quits me soon after as well, because many people I was cool with started moving on, and I wanted to leave the memory of that day behind. I never told anyone on It's Me what happened, not even my friends, as I was afraid no one would believe me. So, if there's anything to take away from this story, it's not to make dangerous decisions like I did that day, pulling up to a sketchy neighborhood to fight a stranger. The It's Me app was shut down on August 10th of this year, and was replaced with a new app, Codename. Recently, I moved back to England with my sister, and we both go to an amazing college here. I hope y'all stay safe and have a Merry Christmas and an even better New Year. It was New Year's Eve, and I was exhausted from a long day of work. I had made no real plans, opting instead to spend a quiet evening alone at home. I had just gotten off the bus and was walking back to my apartment when something felt off. I couldn't explain it at first, but as I made my way down the familiar street, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The usual hum of the city felt oddly distant. The only sound was my footsteps echoing on the sidewalk and the occasional car passing by, but it all seemed too silent for New Year's Eve. Normally there'd be people out celebrating, fireworks in the distance, laughter in the air. Instead, it felt like the whole world had gone still. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was probably the isolation of the holiday getting to me. After all, I'd never been one for large crowds or loud celebrations. Just a quiet night with some food, Netflix, and maybe a glass of wine was all I needed. But as I approached the alleyway near my building, I saw something strange. A figure stood in the shadows, near the corner of the street. I slowed down instinctively, eyeing the figure. It looked like a man. Tall, wearing a heavy jacket, his face obscured by the collar and the dim light. There was something unsettling about him, though. It wasn't that he was necessarily doing anything suspicious, but there was a tension in the air. I felt it in my gut, the kind of feeling you get when you know something isn't quite right, but you can't pinpoint why. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. It was New Year's Eve after all. Maybe he was just waiting for a friend or a ride. But as I kept walking, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The man's head slowly turned in my direction, his eyes locking with mine from the shadows. For a moment, I stood there frozen, caught in his gaze. Seconds later, I turned back to go into my homestead. For a moment, I stood there frozen, caught in his gaze. Couldn't make out his facial features, but there was something in the way he looked at me that sent a wave of dread washing over me. It wasn't a normal look. It wasn't curiosity or surprise. It was cold, almost predatory. And for reasons I can't explain, I felt as though he knew something about me, something I didn't know. I quickened my pace, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just a random stranger, maybe he wasn't even looking at me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was following me. I reached my apartment building and fumbled with my keys as I unlocked the door. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt a sense of relief. I told myself that I was being paranoid, that I'd let my mind wander too far. But the unease didn't go away. I couldn't shake the image of that man's eyes staring at me from the shadows. It lingered in my mind, haunting me as I prepared my dinner. Around 9:30, I decided to relax and watch some TV, trying to forget about the unsettling encounter. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, and I found myself glancing toward the window every so often, as if expecting to see something outside. It was then that I heard the knock at the door. At first I thought it was my neighbor. Maybe they needed something, or it was a last-minute invitation to join a nearby celebration. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. The hallway was empty, nothing but the echo of my own footsteps. Confused, I looked down at the ground. There was a small envelope, addressed to me, placed neatly on the doormat. My heart skipped a beat. The handwriting on the envelope was messy, almost hurried, but the name was unmistakably mine. I bent down to pick it up, feeling an inexplicable chill run down my spine. Opening the envelope, I found a single sheet of paper inside. It was blank, except for one line of text written in bold, hurried letters. I see you. My breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled as I held the paper, staring at the chilling words. I looked out into the hallway again, but still there was no one. No one but me. I slammed the door shut, heart racing. I called the building's security, but they assured me no one had entered the building, and no one had been seen on the cameras outside my door. I didn't know what to do. I was alone, isolated, and something about this felt all too real. Then, as the minutes ticked by, I began to hear something soft, almost inaudible at first. It sounded like someone whispering. I froze, listening carefully. The whispers came again, this time clearer. I realized, with growing horror, that they were coming from the hallway outside my apartment. I crept slowly toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers stopped abruptly, followed by a light tapping. I almost couldn't bear it. Then, to my disbelief, I heard the distinct sound of something scraping against the door, as if someone was dragging their fingers along the wood. I bolted to my phone, dialing 911. The dispatcher asked me if I could leave the apartment and head for a safer place, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear. I heard a faint rustling outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of a heavy breath, like someone standing right outside my door. It felt like hours, but it was only a few minutes before the police arrived. They found nothing. No one in the building, no trace of the man I'd seen earlier, nothing to explain the terror that had consumed me. The envelope had disappeared by the time they arrived, as though it had never been there. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. I never saw the man again, and nothing strange has happened since. But every New Year's Eve I can't help but look over my shoulder, wondering if that figure in the shadows is still out there, waiting.